Governing parties often lose by-elections. That's because they're a chance for voters to protest against the incumbent government with little risk involved. If you're worried about Labour getting into power, but you want to beat the Tories with a stick, you can happily vote for a different party and not worry about the consequences. However, whatever the context, when a party loses a seat it's held for 50 years, we should take note. And that's what happened to the Tories last night in Chesham and Amersham. I'll be joined later by Owen Jones to discuss what this all means. We're going to discuss, of course, what this means for the Conservatives. Is there now a blue wall that's about to crumble? But also for the Labour Party, they got 622 votes in the constituency. And breaking news just before we went live, we know that Keir Starmer's Director of Communications has just resigned. So there are clearly some disputes, conversations going on at the top of the Labour Party. This will all, I promise, end in time for the football. As ever, if you are new to the channel, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. First story. Since its creation in 1974, the Chesham and Amersham constituency has been a safe Conservative stronghold. In that time, the party has never won a majority smaller than 10,000, and in 2019, they won 55% of the vote, 16,000 more than their closest competitors. All this meant that the Lib Dems winning yesterday's by-election was quite the upset.
Green, Sarah Louise, Liberal Democrats, 21,517 votes. Therefore, I do hereby declare that Green, Sarah Louise of the Liberal Democrat Party is duly elected.
This Conservative Party has taken people across our country for granted for far too long. We will continue the work of holding this government to account for letting COVID rip through the care homes. We will speak up for the 3 million people excluded from financial support throughout the pandemic. And we will challenge Boris Johnson to be far more ambitious in tackling climate change, supporting our frontline workers and backing our small businesses. The Liberal Democrats will ensure that they will be held accountable and they will be scrutinised.
That was Sarah Green, the constituency's new MP, criticising the Tories for taking voters for granted. And the results do suggest a desire to punish the governing party. Let's take a look at the numbers. The Lib Dems won 57% in the constituency, so a really big win. It wasn't close. And that added 30 percentage points to the results just 2 years ago. The Conservatives are on 36% or won 36%. That was down 20 points. You can see a massive swing there. Labour vote also declining, but the big story here is that swing from the Tories to the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems now have an 8,000 majority. Now, it's a result the Lib Dem leader Ed Davey said would send a political shockwave through the country.
Well, I think this will send a shockwave through British politics. Liberal Democrats have had good wins in the past, but this is our best ever by-election victory. And if it was repeated across the South, literally dozens of Conservative seats would fall to the Liberal Democrats. People have talked about the red wall in the north, but forgotten about the blue wall in the south. And that's going to come tumbling down if this result is mimicked across this country.
So you heard there a very pleased Ed Davey talking about a blue wall in the south. Now, the idea here is that the blue wall is the flip side of the red wall. The red wall, that's traditionally Labour voting constituencies who voted Brexit and now are falling to the Conservatives. The idea is that there could be different seats in a different part of the country here in the south of England that would have traditionally been real big Tory strongholds, affluent voters who voted Remain, who are now at risk of leaving the party, either to the Lib Dems or to Labour. This result was obviously given the Lib Dems lots of confidence that if that blue wall does fall, it will fall to them. This argument was expressed rather crudely in the following visual metaphor.
I mentioned a blue wall a few minutes ago. and an orange force. Do you know what happens when a really powerful, strong orange force goes against a blue wall? Stand back. Let me show you.
So he is there suggesting this is significant. This is a harbinger of things to come. There is this whole constituency in the country, in the broader sense, constituency in the country, who traditionally voted Conservative and now, for various reasons, are going to go to the Lib Dems. This could be repeated in a general election, and you could see the Lib Dems sweep across the South. That's, of course, not the only explanation of what happened yesterday. So another big issue in the election was local issues. So this includes HS2. The Lib Dems locally campaigned against high-speed rail 2. That goes through the constituency. It so happens that the Lib Dems support it on a national level, but they campaigned on that. They also campaigned on planning reforms, which the Lib Dems say would allow more homes to be built on the green belt, and voters rebelled against that. We could then see this as a victory for NIMBYism, not necessarily particularly progressive people who don't want high-speed rail, which is going to be, I think, necessary for a climate change proof future, and who aren't particularly keen on more houses being built in their area, even though we have a housing shortage. So it could be these local issues and not necessarily issues which the Lib Dems will be able to take advantage of when it comes to a national election, instead of one fought on those local issues. It is also the case that governing parties losing by-elections is just the norm in British politics, and perhaps we shouldn't read very much into this at all. I want to show you a graph now from the Institute for Government. Now, this shows that in every parliament since 1945, the government have, on average, received a significantly reduced vote share in by-elections. It's also the case that the magnitude of this swing isn't particularly unexceptional. So the swing or the drop in the Conservative vote share in Chesham and Amersham was 20 points. And we can see from this graph that actually that was the average drop in vote share for the Conservatives between 1992 and 1997. You might say, yes, but they lost the next general election. It was also the average vote share lost by Labour between 2001 and 2005. They obviously went on to win that next general election. Precedent then makes the Chesham and Amersham results seem normal, unexceptional, which is unlike Hartlepool, which has also been plotted. You can see there in the top right of this chart. That was, almost unprecedented, because the Conservatives added more than 20 points to their vote share as the governing party. That one really did buck a trend. Now, when it comes to saying, this most recent by-election doesn't matter that much because this is a peculiar result. By-elections are always novel, unique. Someone pushing that line, unsurprisingly, was Boris Johnson, who, speaking today, didn't seem particularly concerned about the result.
It's a bit peculiar, a bit bizarre. I won London twice. I think I was elected in Henley twice, and just last month we had gains in Basildon, in Maidstone, in Basingstoke, and all over the place. So we are a great one nation party, and we will continue with our mission to unite and level up, because that is the best way to deliver jobs, prosperity across the whole country.
That's, Boris Johnson there seeming incredibly relaxed. I want to bring Owen Jones in now. We've got him in the digital room. How are you doing, Owen?
I had a bit of a technical mare, Michael, which is why I'm using my rubbish old MacBook camera. But I'm here as we scrabbled around trying to find a functioning cable.
It's nice. It's old school.
It's intense.
I'm aware. I can see you've just had a haircut as well. I knew you were getting that before you came.
You've got to make the effort for Novara, haven't you?
We've got two big visions, or I suppose two big explanations of what happened last night. So one is that this is a real problem for the Conservatives. The Lib Dems are about to sweep through the blue wave in the blue wall in the south of England. The other is that this was a pretty unique one-off. It's a by-election. People were protesting against the government and voting for local reasons. Which one of those are you going for?
Look, the Lib Dems are, by tradition, the by-election kings, and people forget that because as a political force, they were so crushed by their experience in coalition. But if there's one thing the Liberal Democrats have traditionally excelled at, it is storming a by-election. And what they do is they often lay the foundations, and it is rumoured that, for example, in this particular case, Cheryl Gillan, the former Conservative Member of Parliament, was ill for a while. The Lib Dems, it is rumoured, knew that and laid the foundations for their victory. And what they tend to do is colonise local issues. They are hated as campaigners by both Labour and the Conservatives for very similar reasons, which is they're seen as very opportunistic, cynical campaigners. In some local elections, Lib Dems and one part of a constituency will campaign in favour of something, and then in the other part of the constituency or council area, campaign against it. That's just what the Liberal Democrats do. And obviously they did successfully colonise a local issue here. But we also know that there are economically right-wing, reflecting their class interest, affluent homeowners, well-to-do, who are socially liberal, who don't like the direction the Conservative Party has taken. And that's collided with a NIMBY-ish local political issue. But I'd say a big warning, I mean, kind of for the Liberal Democrats, I suppose, which is there's been lots of, we saw this even after the 2015 coalition experience when, for example, they defeated Zach Goldsmith in Richmond Park, the Lib Dems are back. And it has tended to be a false start because what tends to happen is Lib Dems win often by-elections and then lose them at a general election. And we should remember that, and this is, I'm sure we're going to talk about this now, you do expect governments to get punched in the face in a by-election. That is kind of what happens. Opposition parties do better normally in by-elections than they do in general elections, as I think your graph just indicated earlier. So actually, this should be normal politics. This is what you would expect. Would the Lib Dems probably keep the seat? I'd wager probably not, historically speaking, unless a realignment really is taking place. So I think, personally, this is an example of what an opposition party, particularly one that excels at by-elections, should do in a midterm scenario, which is what's just happened.
I mean, I tend to agree with you on that one. So I'm going to go to another clip to, I suppose, push back with this idea that maybe this is a sign of broader sociological trends. This was Dominic Grieve. He was a former Conservative MP, obviously a big Remainer, very anti-Boris Johnson. He spoke to the BBC this morning, and he agreed with the Lib Dem leader that there is a Tory blue wall that might soon crumble.
This has happened not just because of HS2 or because of Greenbelt issues, though doubtless that's played a part. It's because this is a pretty sophisticated electorate that knows what a fraudulent prospectus is. And they have a very low opinion of the Prime Minister, and they consider him to be a charlatan. And this is, I think, quite a widespread view amongst a certain section of the electorate that has consistently voted Conservative all their lives, because this is a deeply Conservative area with a small c. And that's the fundamental problem that the Conservative Party's got. They have a Prime Minister who appears to have an appeal to some sections of the electorate because he's optimistic, he's sunny, he's outgoing, and towards another group who perhaps take life a little bit more seriously, he comes across extremely badly, and it's got much, much worse.
So an interesting argument there from Dominic Greaves. To me, it came across as, I mean, the undertone there I thought was a little bit of classism. He's sort of suggesting these are sophisticated voters, these wealthy voters in the South, who can see through Boris Johnson's buffoonery, not like the Northerners in the Red Wall who just like to see a sunny, optimistic guy speaking. Owen, did you have the same impression from that intervention from Dominic Greaves?
Exactly that, to be honest. I mean, look, Dominic Grieve firstly wants his party back. He's not going to get his party back. So he's trying to use this, as any politician would in his circumstances when his faction's been so comprehensively defeated within the Conservative Party's political leverage, to try and use it to say, well, actually, the Conservatives thought that they had a cost-free political strategy by winning the so-called Red Wall seats, by pivoting towards kind of, the right-wing populism, which abandoned the austerity economics that I think Dominic Grieve actually was quite comfortable with, but he was quite comfortable with, he voted for it consistently, that they could keep the red wall and keep their existing seats in the south. And Dominic Grieve and people are going, no, you can't. You're going to pay a price for that, in an effort, I think, to try and use that as leverage internally. But obviously there's classism there. I think there's a sense that I think they see this, and it is far more complicated in terms of what's actually happening on the ground, because the Tories are doing well amongst older home-owning white people in the north. Some of those are working class, some of them aren't. Many of them are retired. But as far as people like Dominic Grieve are concerned, this is a kind of plebeian turn by the Conservatives, that they have abandoned the genteel middle-class conservatism of the Shires in favour of the rough, coarse, crude, blue-collar conservatism of the north. That isn't true. And obviously, you know, the form of conservatism that Dominic Grieve and others promoted was one of slash and burn economics, which devastated working class communities. And I'm not saying that that's been entirely comprehensively abandoned by this government. They do turn on the taps very cynically in those communities which they are seeking to win over or to kind of secure and consolidate their existing electoral coalition. But no, I mean, I think, you know, at the end of the day, I think the danger I'm afraid, for the Labour Party and for the left, and the danger equally for Dominic Grieve, is the Conservatives have every chance of consolidating their grip over the so-called red wall, northern ex-industrial areas which disproportionately have older white home-owning voters, where younger people have disproportionately left, and in a general election, keeping those southern seats. I mean, just on that, I'd say, remember Joe Swinson went very hard, much to our chagrin, against Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party in the general election. And to one degree, that was actually completely irrational and an act of self-harm, because by fueling the demonisation of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, all that did is help drive certain voters into the arms of the Conservatives. But the rational basis for what she was doing is trying to appeal to Conservative voters who were disillusioned with the Brexit turn, but who were more scared of Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. And I think the reality is, in a place like Chesham and Amersham, is a lot of those home-owning, affluent voters who've plumped for the Lib Dems this time and quite annoyed about HS2 and don't really like Brexit and think Boris Johnson is probably a bit of a charlatan. I think if any vaguely progressive Labour Party, I mean, at the moment, they don't have any political vision of any description, but they will think to themselves, to be honest, any Labour Party in government might increase my taxes. And if I vote Lib Dem, I might get those people in power and they'll increase my taxes. So I'm just going to vote Conservative, even though I think Boris Johnson's a moron. And I think that's what's likely to happen.
I agree on that front. And I think probably Boris Johnson knows that. So I wouldn't expect him to now sort of see this and think, oh, God, now I've got to suddenly become a liberal and start speaking as if my main constituency is in the south of England, because I do feel I agree with you essentially. Once a general election comes along and it looks like a fight between a Conservative or a Labour-led government, these people are going to pitch, or the majority of people in these affluent constituencies are probably going to pitch for people who they are pretty sure won't raise their taxes. Let's go on to our next story. My apologies to Dominic Grieve. I was calling him Dominic Greaves. I will make sure I get that right next time, if he ever appears on the show in a clip again. Labour never expected to win in the Chesham and Amersham by-election. However, the scale of their defeat has raised questions about the health of the party under Starmer's leadership. They won only 622 votes, which represents a 1.6% vote share. As you can see from the following chart, this was Labour's worst ever performance in the constituency. So you can see here, they've never done particularly well in the constituency, and they have done very badly. Their previous low was 6% in 2010, their previous high 21% in 2017. So historically, it looks very bad. However, speaking to Sky this morning, Jess Phillips suggested Labour's poor result needn't worry the party, as this time it was the result of tactical voting.
Why do you think that you didn't do better in the Chesham and Amersham by-election? I don't think that anyone was necessarily expecting the result we got, but I think even fewer people would have been expecting the Labour Party to take Chesham and Amersham. And I think that what's happened there is that voters aren't stupid. Often, I think, in public commentary, we talk about voters in a manner as if they don't know what they're doing. And it seems very clear that the vote in Chesham and Amersham was a vote against the government, and the voters decided that the best way to do that was to corral around the most likely winner, and in this case it was the Lib Dems. It's a classic Lib Dem squeeze message. I beat the Lib Dems, so I'm no stranger to it.
No, Jess Phillips says some unreasonable things. That probably wasn't one of them. People are more likely to vote tactically in by-elections. That's because, as we've talked about, you get to hit the government cost-free, risk-free. Also, in a by-election, you normally have the opposition parties campaigning a bit harder than they normally would in a general election. So we know that the Lib Dems were campaigning incredibly heavily in this constituency. Also, I want to show you one more graphic because we compared this vote to Labour's previous performance in that constituency. It's probably also just as good a comparison, potentially a better comparison, to look at the last by-election which the Lib Dems gained from the Conservatives and what happened to the Labour vote then. So this is Richmond Park in 2016. So that was the last time the Lib Dems took a seat off the Conservatives in between general elections. Then you can see, likewise, the Labour vote really fell as people realised it was a two-horse race. So in this election, Christian Woolman was the Labour candidate. He only got 1,515 votes, which was 3.6% of the vote, down 8.7 from previous. So again, we see that the Labour Party was squeezed, though it was to less of a significant degree than it was this time around. Owen Jones, what's your take here? Do you think that Jess Phillips is right that essentially this was just the result of tactical voting? Or do you think the fact it was so low that only 622 people voted for the Labour Party suggests that there is also something else going on here?
I think it's a bit from column A, a bit from column B, to be honest. I mean, look, that is, Labour never going to obviously be competitive in that seat. In 2017, which of course the high watermark of Corbynism, Labour came second, but a distant second. This is true blue country, and realistically, only the Liberal Democrats have a good chance in a constituency which is as safe a seat for the Conservatives as that particular one in the South, with that kind of social composition. And yeah, I mean, clearly vast numbers of people who would prefer to vote for Labour if they had that choice voted for the Liberal Democrats because they knew that was the best possible way of getting rid of a Conservative member of Parliament. But equally, the brutal reality is that there is no motivating reason for anyone to vote for the Labour Party in 2020, the year of our Lord 2021. Nothing, no reason at all. I don't know why I vote Labour because, to the irritation sometimes of people on the left, you know, I'm a Labourite of a left persuasion. So I loyally go and vote for that. I don't know why other people are voting for the Labour Party at the moment. I don't know how you answer the question. I really want to vote for the Labour Party because to stop the Tories, fine. But as we've seen in this particular case, people just concluded there was a different way of stopping that. People aren't voting for something. They're not. You don't vote for the Labour Party at the moment because you think, here's a great inspiring vision that resonates with me, which will transform the life of me, my family, my community, my country, or indeed the world, if we look at the climate emergency. Of course, no one's doing that. So, I mean, the fact that the Labour vote is essentially the same as the Labour membership in that, and I would presume some Labour members vote for the Liberal Democrats, so it's not exactly an exact Venn diagram there. The fact is, you know, the Labour Party's got the sort of vote you'd expect from the monster raving loony party, which is humiliating. You know, there've been many by-elections in the past where people have tactically voted for the Liberal Democrats, but the Labour Party still retain a core vote. No Labour core vote existed at all in this seat. It just vanished. It evaporated utterly. And I think that's the problem that sums up for the Labour Party. Normally, a political party, one of the two major parties in any significant constituency where it's had a significant vote in the past, should have a die-hard, I'm going to vote for my party to the bitter end. I don't care what the stakes are. And that didn't exist in this constituency because there's nothing to drive people to vote for the Labour Party. But I do think it was overwhelmingly tactical voting. And I think what we should, I don't know if I'm skipping ahead, so just stop me if I'm skipping ahead. What should worry the Labour Party is their excuse about a so-called vaccine bounce for the government, meaning that they lost the last by-election in Hartlepool and have a very good chance of losing the next by-election in Batley and Spen is because of vaccine rollout. Well, if that's true, why is it hitting them and not the Liberal Democrats?
No, I mean, I absolutely agree with you there. The problem isn't so much Labour's vote share in this by-election. It's what it says about Keir Starmer's excuses about their vote share in by-elections, which they should have won. So in Hartlepool, obviously, Labour didn't lose because of tactical voting, because it was a two-horse race between Labour and the Conservatives. When Labour did lose, what were Keir Starmer's allies saying? They were saying, well, Boris Johnson is now essentially indestructible because we're amid a vaccine bounce. How could anyone, however good our leader was, possibly beat this man who has just delivered vaccines to the masses, right? And as you say, Owen, that argument doesn't stack up, because why was Ed Davey able to do it, right? People in this constituency also got vaccinated. And actually more of them have been vaccinated now than they had been vaccinated when Hartlepool was coming along. So Keir Starmer really is going to struggle to find excuses for elections which do matter to the Labour Party when they lose them. Obviously, Hartlepool was one, Batley and Spen is coming up, and we will see what happens then. Whatever we think about what this says about Keir Starmer, it does seem that there is some disquiet within the Labour Party, including in Keir Starmer's top team. Kate Ferguson from The Sun today tweeted, "Knives out for Keir after the Chesham and Amersham by-election disaster, hearing that supporters of Angela Rayner and Lisa Nandy quietly ringing round to sound out possible support if he goes." Now, that claim has been disputed. Rachel Wearmouth at the Huffington Post tweeted later, Labour source close to Angela Rayner and Lisa Nandy has called reports the two have been sounding out MPs about a leadership challenge absolute bollocks. So claims and counterclaims there. What we do know, which I saw Owen Jones tweeting about before this show, is that Ben Nunn, who is Keir Starmer's Director of Communications, has, in the past hour or so, resigned. So there definitely is disquiet at the top of the team. It's not just a case of briefing and counter briefing. Something is going on. Owen, can you enlighten us any more about what is happening at the top of the Labour Party right now?
Well, the wheels are falling off. I'll just be blunt about it. That's very self-evident. I think it's been quite an open secret that the Ben Nunn, the director, no longer the director of communication, has not been happy in that role for a long time. And I think sources, I think various people who have a good grip of Labour politics, who aren't necessarily on the left, there was a consensus that they don't have a political strategy of any direction. They came into the position they have thinking that by virtue of looking competent, Keir Starmer not having any baggage, being a knight of the realm, no less, having run a state bureaucracy, he could present himself as competent compared to his predecessor and competent in contrast to Boris Johnson. That was incinerated, that dividing line, by the vaccine rollout, because they didn't offer a dividing line based on vision or values. They were left with literally absolutely nothing to say, which is not a great position for directive communications to be left in. I think what we're talking about in terms of the manoeuvrings, though, I think is important, because I know sources close to Angela Rayner's team are very adamant that they're not telephoning people around, but I also know other people who are very adamant that people linked to Angela Rayner are ringing people. So, there was a conflict in understanding of what's happening in that particular case. I think the issue with Angela Rayner is there are people close to Angela Rayner who do want her to stand for leader, and I think there are others who don't at the moment. And I think the worry is that old adage, the cliche, he who wields the dagger never wears the crown. If you overthrow your leader, you generally do not, or you never, and there's not really a direct, a precedent for then replacing them. I mean, take example, Michael Heseltine. Michael Heseltine mobilized in an attempt to overthrow Margaret Thatcher in the coup. He didn't end up her replacement. John Major, who was her Chancellor of the Exchequer and loyal to Margaret Thatcher in that episode, he instead became the successor. So, there's no easy route. I think the other issue I'd say is a big chunk of the right of the Labour Party, I think there's good reason to believe, are waiting to see what the result of the Unite General Secretary election is. Because the Unite is the most influential trade union in the country, the most influential union within the Labour Party. And if Gerard Coyne, the right-wing candidate, wins, that will then be used to clamp down on democracy within the Labour Party and do all sorts of very, very, very terrifying bad things, but also to rewrite the leadership rules, probably a reversion to the Electoral College, for example. So you give a massive chunk of the votes weighted in favour of members of Parliament. You change the nominations required to get a left-winger on the ballot in the first place, and that would stop a left-winger getting on the ballot paper. The issue, I think, with Keir Starmer now is dead man walking, politically speaking. You can't lose 2 by-elections and stay on as leader in the long term. I mean, if he loses Batley and Spen, where I was earlier this week, we have to call for him to resign, no ifs, no buts. It's a ludicrous position to be in. The leader of, just to be very clear about how and it does link to what we just talked about with the by-election in Amersham and Chesham, in Amherst, I keep getting it. Anyway, but oppositions do not lose by-elections. That almost never happens. Before Hartlepool, that had happened twice in the last 50 years. You can't double the number of by-elections you have lost, or an opposition has lost to the government, in the last half century within the space of 2 months, and credibly argue you have any chance whatsoever of staying in power. I went to Batley and Spen, and what I saw were particularly Muslim Labour voters who are core Labour voters. Very important point to make, by the way, because there's going to be a whole load of Islamophobic dog whistles, there already are, coming out of Batley and Spen, somehow suggesting that Muslim voters aren't legitimate voters, that this is a George Galloway factor, rah, 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 rah. In the last general election, an estimated, according to the latest poll, 86% of British Muslims voted for the Labour Party in this country. There's over 3 million Muslims in this country. In many seats, British Muslims have a big, big influence over which party becomes or wins each constituency. And they are furious when you talk to them. They feel completely abandoned by their party. They want to teach Labour a lesson. They want to give Labour a punch in the nose. That's how the people I spoke to, they sounded just like Scottish Labour voters before them, who've spoken just the same way. My father, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, ever since our family first arrived here, we always voted for the Labour Party. For the first time, I'm not going to vote for the Labour Party, and I'm going to teach them a lesson. And I heard that from Scottish Labour voters. It was the same said by some voters in the so-called Red Wall as well. And the issue is, in Scotland, when they crossed that electoral Rubicon, they didn't come back. Now, in Batley and Spen, George Galloway, who I think is a cynical opportunist, to say the least, just voted Conservative a few weeks ago. But nonetheless, he has cut through with his messages on things like Palestine. And, when pundits say, Palestine and, these are foreign policy niche issues that the average voter doesn't care about, apart from freaks in the Labour Party and all the rest of it. Well, they're wrong, because everyone was talking about Palestine on the doorstep, or a lot of people in Batley and Spen. The reason that so many British Muslims were more attracted to Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party was his track record on fighting Islamophobia, his stance on issues like Palestine, but also Kashmir, for example, and also the fact that around half of Muslims in this country live below the poverty line, and Labour's domestic policies are more likely to resonate with them as a consequence. And this idea that Keir Starmer's leadership had, which was the biggest, this is what Peter Mandelson said about working class voters, allegedly. They have nowhere else to go. And they thought 2019 voters, whether they be Muslim, whether they be young voters, that's the flaw. They're not going to leave the Labour Party. They're not going to, we don't need to listen to them anymore. We just have to go and chase these other voters and wave flags in a very patronising way in order to do so, without committing to a vision of what we're going to do with the country. And guess what? It's not won any of those voters over, but it is losing the support of those voters instead. So I think what's happening is Labour's electoral coalition is further collapsing under Keir Starmer's leadership. As things stand, things are looking very bad in Batley and Spen for Labour, and privately Labour councillors tell me that the seat is lost. They tell me on streets where 80 to 90% of local residents voted Labour in the last election. They're just telling canvassers to F off. Bitter opposition. Actually, the Labour candidate, Jo Cox's sister, is actually very charismatic on the doorstep. She's obviously a very good campaigner. There's no political vision being offered by the Labour Party. That's the issue, and that's cutting through. So I think what will happen after Batley and Spen is we on the left have to, if he loses Batley and Spen, Keir Starmer has to resign as leader of the Labour Party, and the left has to think very seriously about how we get some sort of candidate on the ballot paper in those circumstances. If people have left the Labour Party over the last few months, I would strongly recommend you join so that you will have a vote in any coming contest. It does underline how important the Unite General Secretary election is. That's why Steve Turner has to win. So for those of you who are angry that Howard Beckett's not in anymore after he withdrew to support Steve Turner, that is a politically very, very important battlefield in terms of for the left in British society and within the Labour Party. But I think the right may hold their fire, or a lot of the Parliamentary Labour Party, because they fear at the moment, until the leadership rules are changed, the left has a chance of clawing back some power, either with a candidate who's more amenable to the left or an outright left candidate. So I think they will hold fire, a lot of them. But his position will be untenable if he loses the Batley and Spen by-election. He won't lead Labour into the next general election, in my view, if that happens. The issue is, will it happen a leadership contest when they rigged the rules to stop the left getting on? And that's a big, big problem for us.
We're going to talk a bit more about the Unite leadership election in a moment, because there have been some developments today. That point you raised, though, about MPs waiting to see what happens before they make a move is really interesting, because it could work in both ways, I feel, because, thinking about the decision-making processes of Angela Rayner, which seems pretty significant at this point in time. She seems like probably one of the most likely people who could topple Keir Starmer. And even though I know many people on the left have lots of difficulties with her, I think she probably would be more amenable to the left than Keir Starmer is. She might not try to change the leadership rules. For example, I'd been assuming that whilst it might be better for the Labour Party for her to go early, she might be happy to sort of plod along until we lose the next general election, and then after that try and go for the leadership. But if she fears that actually the leadership rules might change in the near future because it will go back to the Electoral College, she's not particularly popular among MPs, then she might think, I've got to go early, this is my only chance, right? So could it be the case that this threat of the leadership rules changing could push a kind of soft left coalition to defeat Keir Starmer and to stand before it's too late and the party is completely stitched up for the people even to the right of them?
Well, an influential left fixer within who straddles, I'd say, the Labour Party and the trade union movement told me today that actually, given there is a significant chance that Gerard Coyne is going to win the Unite General Secretary race, because although Howard Beckett, who should be commended for standing down and putting the left and the Labour movement before himself, has stood down, Sharon Graham, another candidate who positions herself on the left, hasn't done so. And Gerard Coyne, last time round, got 40% of the vote. I know we'll talk about the Unite race probably in more detail, but he has a very good chance of winning. And therefore, it could be a do or die moment, that unless the left, the left, as well as those sections of the soft left, who I suppose are the left-facing elements of the soft left, who are now angrily disillusioned with Keir Starmer's leadership and realise that this is a massive train wreck. If there isn't an attempt to act in the aftermath of a defeat, if it happens in Batley and Spen, it's not certain, but there's a lot of evidence pointing in that direction, then that could be it. So I think there needs to be, and I really do think, the problem the Unite General Secretary race showed was, I think, could be replicated on the left flank of the Parliamentary Labour Party, because I don't think there would be an easy consensus over who the candidate should be. I think you'll end up with a lot of fights on social media in the same way, where rival candidates appeal to people on social media for legitimacy, and it could end up being a bum fight where no one gets on the ballot paper as a consequence, because you've got too many rival candidates asserting that they should be the left candidate of some description in that particular eventuality. It does depend, by the way, if it's an open contest. So, for example, if Keir Starmer resigns, the nominations goes down to 20. That's game on then. You could get a left candidate quite easily on the ballot paper. If he didn't resign, it's 40. That would be very, very hard. in a recent backbench election, Graham Morris, who's a left-wing backbencher, got 38 votes. That's nearly 40, and that suggests you could, it's nearly there. You could, in theory, but I think getting a left candidate to challenge Keir Starmer, I'm not sure they'd get the 40 nominations. I really don't. And it would depend on who else stands. And I think there'd be a lot of pressure on Keir Starmer not to resign for that reason. There could be a stalking horse. That's obviously what happened, of course, famously with Margaret Thatcher. Sir Anthony Mayer stood as a stalking horse. He was an obscure backbencher. That paved the way for an open leadership contest where other candidates could stand. So that's a possibility as well. But I think the danger at the moment is we're running out of time, because I'm not, Gerard Coyne, we saw in Unison where you had more than one left candidate standing. They got a majority together. They won a majority, but quite stupidly, Unison and Unite have first past the post electoral systems operating. So it doesn't really matter if you win a majority for the left, because the right-wing candidate just comes through the middle. And they will change the leadership rules, and then we won't be able to get a left candidate on maybe for a generation. So I do think after Batley and Spen, if Labour loses, I think the left should go for it. I don't think we have a choice in those circumstances. But who it is, how we get there, how we build a coalition to do that would be very difficult. But I have to say to people, anyone now who's saying, oh, well, this is outrageous, you're just, destabilising, this isn't tenable. Come on. Even if, lots of people, I didn't vote for Keir Starmer. A majority of people in the Labour movement who voted did. By a big margin. He stood on 10 pledges, which have disappeared. He hasn't offered a clear vision. He promised party unity. That hasn't happened. He promised professionalism. That hasn't happened. He promised electability. That clearly hasn't happened. This is heading for catastrophe for the Labour movement, the Labour Party, and as a consequence, British society. It's not a tenable situation. So I do think we have to make an appeal. The left has to be savvy. And sometimes this doesn't happen, which means appealing to people who voted for Keir Starmer, who are now disillusioned. They do exist. I know personally people who voted for Keir Starmer who now feel very disillusioned. So there needs to be an appeal to that chunk of the Labour Party, Labour movement. Not idiots. Why didn't you see that one coming? That's not going to help us at this particular juncture. We've got to build that coalition, but we're running out of time. And as I've said, I think they're going to try and hold out the right for a change in leadership rules. And the question is, would Keir Starmer resign in that eventuality? I'm not convinced he would. We've got to operate on the basis that, it might be 40 nominations and it might be 20, and we're going to have to make some very difficult decisions if that happens.
He's not going to resign because it would benefit the left. If we've learned anything about Keir Starmer, his priority is to make sure the left can't have much of an influence in the Labour Party. So I'm pretty sure he'll stay on, and the left or the opponents of Starmer are going to need 40 odd nominations, which, as you say, is probably going to involve some potentially awkward compromises. Talking of awkward compromises, or at least the failure to come to them, we are going to go now onto the latest developments in Unite. I think we can get up an image for you now. On previous shows, we've despaired at the fact that 3 left candidates entered the race to lead Unite the Union against only one candidate from the right. That risks splitting the left vote and handing a union with 1.4 million members, and which is the Labour Party's largest donor, to a candidate committed to rolling back any gains made by socialists over the past decade in Britain. On that front, we have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that 2 of the candidates have come to an agreement and one will be dropping out. Steve Turner and Howard Beckett have released a joint statement that included the following. Howard Beckett has decided he will support Steve Turner as Unite's next General Secretary. Both recognise the vision and strengths of their respective campaigns, and Steve Turner recognises the key manifesto commitments and energy generated by Howard's campaign. They will both work to implement a blended manifesto, taking the best ideas from both candidates when Steve Turner becomes General Secretary. It goes on, Howard Beckett will campaign alongside Steve for the next 2 months to present a joint programme which includes greater support for workplace representatives, important new communications initiatives including Unite TV, upgraded education and training for members, an independent and progressive political voice, and a new structure for the union reflecting the diversity of our nations and regions. That's the good news. There were 3 candidates. 2 of them are now uniting behind Steve Turner. Much credit to Howard Beckett for doing so. The bad news is that the other left candidate, Sharon Graham, has refused to come to any deal. So in response to the statement from Turner and Beckett, Graham said, "The announcement of the Turner-Beckett ticket, along with the Gerard Coyne candidacy, now completes the Westminster Brigade. I am the workplace candidate and will be standing to ensure the voice of Unite members is heard." So there's still going to be 2 left candidates and 1 right-wing candidate. Do you have any insight into why this has happened? I think lots of people watching this will be completely despairing that we are going into another union election, one that really matters both for the union movement and for the Labour Party, and the left couldn't get it together to unite behind a single candidate. Why, when Howard Beckett was willing to fall behind Steve Turner, could Steve Turner and Sharon Graham, not come to any kind of agreement here?
Sharon Graham's coming from a different place, because what we saw with Howard Beckett is he put his greatest emphasis on political strategy, which was to that Unite should have a very, very firm line on Keir Starmer's leadership, including potentially pulling the plug. That's, to be fair to him, that wasn't all. He, for example, talked about increasing the strike ballot, the strike ballot fund, for example. Sharon Graham is more of what you would describe as a syndicalist. She's not somebody who has a particular interest in Unite's relationship with the Labour Party. She has, she's known as a good organizer. That's her, she has a very dedicated following of people around her from the organizing department of Unite. And that's her big thing. It's about, not having a service model of trade unionism, focusing on organizing, which a lot of us watching would strongly agree with. But she's not somebody who really has a strong position on vis-a-vis Unite's, Unite and the Labour Party and the political left, I suppose. So I think, it was very difficult negotiations which took place over the last few days, which was very difficult in itself between Howard Beckett's team and Steve Turner's team. But Sharon Graham's team are adamant they're not going to stand down. One of the main arguments they're pushing is that she's a female candidate. It is, of course, true that the trade union movement, the majority are women, and that isn't represented properly at all at the top of the trade union movement. There is, to be brutally honest, something of machismo, partly in some sections of the leaderships of the trade union movement. And we've seen what happened in GMB, which was one of the big trade unions in the country, one of the big 3, when their last general secretary, was forced to resign amidst the terrible scandal. So you can see, that machismo is a big problem. But at the same time, what's likely to happen if this goes wrong, and there's a very good chance it will, is it won't be a woman leading Unite. It will be an extremely right-wing, 1950s style trade union right-winger, Gerard Coyne, who is a left-bashing, reactionary of a very, very old school of, 1950s style bosses trade unionism, who would completely trash the kind of, whether it be Unite in terms of organising workers, in terms of having a militant edge with employers, as well as obviously working hand in glove with the leadership of the Labour Party to suppress Labour Party democracy and stitch up the leadership rules. So, unfortunately, Sharon Graham is just not on the same, she's not coming from the same position as Howard Beckett. It's not easy in the same way to appeal to her. Some might argue, by the way, she might end up taking votes off Gerard Coyne, because, some of Gerard Coyne's likely people voting for him will be people going, well, I'm just fed up with Unite and the Labour Party going hand in hand, and Unite should butt out, and I don't want my money going on that. And Sharon Graham, her pitch could actually appeal to some of them. But I have put that to people, and they did point out to me in the last Unite General Secretary election, when it's very important to make this point, Gerard Coyne got 10 times less nominations than Len McCluskey, but then ended up nearly winning. He came within 4 percentage points of winning. He got about 42% of the vote. And people then go, well, nominations mean nothing. Well, actually, what it shows is the right always outperform their nominations. So Gerard Coyne again came last, but the right people who support his candidacy are less likely to turn up to trade union branch meetings. And that's, I suppose that's the danger now, which is because they said to me, if you compare with what happened in 2017, we did have another syndicalist candidate, Allinson, who stood, and he only got about 14% of the vote, but that was nearly enough for Gerard Coyne to win. That just getting that share of the vote was nearly enough. So the danger is she may take some off Gerard Coyne, but she's going to take some off Steve Turner too. I know Steve Turner's team are wargaming on the basis now that Sharon is not going to stand down, and there's no evidence to suggest she will. I understand a letter is going to go in signed by women in the trade union movement urging her to do so, and that pressure does need to be exerted. But we're nearly at time. Monday is the absolute cut-off. That's when the statements are submitted. She's digging in, and the danger, therefore, is, as things stand, we saw what happened in Unison. More than 3 left candidates stood. The right-wing candidate won, even though they won a majority. And the danger is, again, with Sharon Graham, that she will take enough of both to come through, to allow Gerard Coyne still to come through the middle. That would be a catastrophe. And that's why, if there's any difference between now and 2017, back then, no one thought Len McCluskey had any chance of losing. He had incumbency advantage as well. And they didn't mobilise as a consequence. Honestly, if you're on the left, this is do or die. This is a kind of, we're talking a generational defeat if this goes wrong. So the left, if they want, the Unite, which is the absolute centre of the left's infrastructure in British society, not just in the Labour Party, but Class, the People's Assembly, UK Cut, they were very much involved in supporting all these other movements. That will be a catastrophe that the left will struggle to recover from for a very long time. So I do think the left has to throw everything into this, because Sharon Graham's standing means Gerard Coyne, if I was a betting man, I'd say he's going to win this. He's the favourite to win. And only if people throw everything into Steve Turner's campaign is there any chance of that's not happening.
The stakes could not be higher. We promised we'd end in time for the football, so we're going to rush through our final story, which is a more light-hearted one. By-elections are famously unpredictable affairs, which is precisely why it's risky to make strong predictions. Yet Jim Pickard, who is chief political correspondent at the Financial Times, didn't get that memo. On the day of the Chesham Amersham by-election, he tweeted the following: "Seeing lots of excited speculation today, but I'll eat my hat if the Lib Dems win here, one of the most true blue seats in the country." Now, within 12 hours of that tweet, Pickard was proven to have been dramatically wrong. Not only did the Lib Dems win that seat, they won it comfortably with an 8,000 majority. So the next question, would Jim Pickard eat his hat? Let's take a look.
I did a stupid tweet predicting that the Liberal Democrats would not win in Chesham and Amersham, and if that happened, I would eat my hat. This is the hat I've chosen. Just cutting off some fine morsels. So here we go. I don't think it's cheating to wash it down with a nice glass of water. I like to think that I can say I've kept my word. Hang on, one more. Let's hope it's not toxic, because if there's one thing worse than a stupid tweet, it's death by hat eating.
Now, I have to say, we have our disagreements with Jim Pickard on this show, but I had some respect for that clip, because unlike Matt Goodwin, he's a political scientist. That's maybe too nice a way to put it. He's someone who makes political predictions, and he got it wrong in 2017. He said, if Labour get more than 38% of the vote, I'll eat my book live on TV. Now, he went on Sky News to do that, but he just put the page in his mouth, and then after the cameras went away, spat it out. I was kind of genuinely impressed there that Jim Pickard swallowed parts of the hat. Owen, I don't know what you made of that. Do you have increased respect now for Jim Pickard, even though he's terrible at predictions? He actually swallowed parts of his hat.
I watched it this morning. I was really worried about him. I just don't think what's going to happen to his digestive system. Like what chemicals when that's all I could think about. I've met Jim Pickard. Do you know what? I don't, obviously my politics are different. He's a nice guy, not something you can say about lots of lobby journalists, by the way. He's a genuinely nice guy. He's of the Financial Times stable, reflects the politics, therefore. But what I was like, I was going to get in touch with him just to see he was okay, because I'm seriously worried about him. Michael, it's really worrying. You should don't.
Well, I think it just goes straight through. I think things like, because it's not going to break down in your stomach, is it? So I think you're just going to get bits of cloth in your shit.
You don't know what chemical. That's a horrible image. Thank
you.
If
the dye seeps out of it.
That's lovely. I just think you should check. I think what you should do first is research the hat and the chemicals involved, because it's risky. There'll be people watching it who are going to emulate it, and we could have a wave of hat-related fatalities in this country.
So you think he now, if he's a responsible journalist, he should now put "Don't try this at home" and suggest he can say he researched all of the
impressionable readership of the Financial Times could just be wiped out. You could just, the commuter, the stockbroker belt could just be decimated. This could be worse than COVID.
I can imagine. Yeah, I think a hat. This is just a guess. I haven't researched it, but I think it would probably tend more towards the constipation side than the shit side.
Why are we talking about shit on national?
Up by
you're a highbrow guy.
By a hat.
It doesn't. We don't.
We'll have to. We'll have to ask Jim Pickard which way it goes. Obviously, one other option is just not to make dumb predictions online. But once you've done it, if you follow through, that's the
Dan Hodges
thing to do.
It could be worse. Dan Hodges ran naked after saying UKIP wouldn't do very well in 2015, and that was horrible. So I would prefer to watch someone potentially poison himself with dye than watch Dan Hodges run naked through the streets of London.
Owen Jones, thank you so much for coming on this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Lots of love. Lads, England. Woo.
Yeah, I know you're going to be watching it. Don't pretend you're not interested.
I am watching it. I'm very excited. I'm actually very excited. I'm going to go and watch it now with, I get very het up.
Yeah. I'll let you pump yourself up now for that. Thank you, as ever, for watching Tysky Sour. We'll be back on Monday at 7 p.m. For now, you've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.